Welcome to Yumi and All Things She. Our podcast is about all aspects of being a woman, from motherhood to careers, romantic relationships to family relationships and dynamics, and everything in between. It's a chance to learn, explore, and feel what's genuine and imagined as a woman in this world, along with multi-generational conversations that will stimulate your soul. So sit back, laugh, smile, and even cry a little along with us as we begin our journey together. You, me, and all things she. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of You, Me, and All Things She. Deb here. And to get started, let's first hear a word from the show's sponsor.
Attention gig workers and 1099 self-employed contractors. Did you know there's a little-known tax credit just for you, and there's a chance you could claim up to a whopping $32,200? That's right. Don't miss out. Act now before it's gone and get what's rightfully yours. Go to gigworkersolutions.com. That's gigworkersolutions.com to see if you qualify. It's free. Again, that's gigworkersolutions.com, or click the link in the description. You'll be glad you did.
Well, thanks for hanging out with me on this episode. Today, we're going to actually start the beginning of a 4-part long series, and it's all going to be wrapped around relationships. To start it, kind of, kickstart the episode. In this particular series, we're going to talk about how to build a strong foundation for your marriage that lasts a lifetime. So as you know, we got to dig into a definition, and the definition of marriage is a union of two people as partners in a personal relationship. I think that keeps it pretty simple, and I love the fact that it is simply a union of two people. You can define that however works for you. There's no judgment, there's no blaming, there's no shaming. It is just simply a committed union between two people. That's what that definition really speaks to me. And as I've contemplated this episode, the series, for quite a long time, it's kind of been rattling in my head, rattling in my mind, rattling in my heart. And so I said, let's just jump into it. And what's the most closest relationship that I have at this point in my life? And it's with my husband. So we're going to talk about this in 4 different segments. One segment of the series will be all about sibling relationships and family of origin relationships. Another aspect of relationships that we will uncover as we go through the series is friendships and how those evolve over a life cycle. And ultimately, maybe we'll talk about work relationships or, other relationships that just kind of pop up over a period of time. Not quite sure what that 4th segment's going to be, but it will all be wrapped around relationships. Maybe even a little bit about the relationship we have with ourselves, because I think that's really number one. But to start the series off, I want to talk about our marriages. Our partner, my husband, is the most valuable, most important person in my life. And I know some of you that have heard previous episodes maybe have heard about an abusive relationship. But what I didn't uncover is that since that time, that happened, over 34, 35 years ago. But since that time, I have actually been married for over 32 years to a most amazing man. When you say yin and yang, that is totally us, opposites, as they say, attract. And I think there are some key aspects of that oppositeness that are important to be aware of in a relationship. And if you are truly an opposite of your spouse, your significant other, you want to identify those and then celebrate them, because there's going to be some similarities that bring you together. But ultimately, I think there's got to be differences that really make you each a better person by being together. And we'll dive into that a little bit better. But he is my rock. He is my biggest hero. He is my biggest cheerleader. He is ultimately the one that I rely on and have for all these 32 years to be my right-hand man, to be the one that's by my side no matter what. Fall, fail, success. We're in this game together. We're in this thing called life together. And so I can't be happier to talk about relationships and how we, over those 32 years, have uncovered and discovered ways to build that relationship that go through a lot of different cycles. So what I think was important to really begin is, what my experience has been is we go through this evolution of life in a marriage, in growth as a woman, as families potentially develop. And so I broke it into 5 different stages of the process. I'm not quite through all of them at this point, so I could just envision what I'm watching, the generation before me experience. And so the first phase or stage in that relationship is the newlywed phase, and we're all familiar with that. It's getting to know each other. It's figuring out what really it takes to make that long-term commitment. And then it also takes some time to uncover and discover what's really below the surface. And so I know that can sometimes take years to really get beyond that newlywed phase because, it's so much more than the bickering about the lid on the toothpaste or dirty clothes not making it quite to the hamper. But many of us have seen kind of that same things that's sitting on the, chair in the room, or it's sitting in front of the dresser. Those are the things that begin to develop and mold the relationship that sometimes we either one, take for granted, or two, we begin to stuff down. I don't want to hurt his feelings, or I don't want to speak up and say this. What we need to do is make sure that we don't come off with the wrong tone. First of all, they don't need another mother. They had one, hopefully. And if not, they had someone that represented that female role model in their life before they met you. And so they're not looking for another mother. We don't need to be that person in the relationship. So how would I treat my absolute best friend? Well, I would talk to them with dignity and respect. And maybe we need to sit down and just have a conversation. Over the years, we've talked about, it's time for a family meeting. So those were the times when we would kind of uncover some of those special topics or things that we needed to dig a little bit deeper into and really have that heart-to-heart conversation at times. But it's easy for us to stuff them and let that fire begin to build and create then a moment of anger because, I don't want to say anything. And I can only say that one person I really admire that has been very true to herself in this relationship is my youngest daughter. And she has shared several different situations where she's just felt comfortable enough to speak up for herself and ask for what she wants. And I did learn that early on in the first marriage that wasn't successful, is that you have to ask for what you want and look at what you get. And that's kind of the motto that I've tried to live my life by, is that if I'm not happy, if things aren't going the way I'd like them to go, then I need to ask for what I'm looking for, especially from that other person, my intimate partner. And if it's not making me happy, then let's talk about it. And we'll talk about those keys to a very positive relationship. So that's the newlywed phase. I think the second phase of our life, I'm going to call that the engaging phase. I've never seen anyone really break it down like this, but this is what resonated with me. That's the engaging phase. And what I mean by engaging is that we're starting a family. We're maybe talking about that. We're developing a career. Maybe you finished college. You're beginning to climb that corporate ladder. Or you're figuring out where you're meant to be as a career person or a worker, really getting kind of this routine of life down, that maybe there's some addition of the children that creates a couple, creates a family. You're learning how to ebb and flow between maybe work life, home life balances. But this is the time when you really become, when you're moving from the two of you potentially, and even if you're not having children, maybe you're having a dog or two or a pet, a couple of pets. Those are children too. And so you're really learning to operate more as a body, an entity, rather than just two individuals. And so I call that the engaging phase of the marriage. You do sometimes have intimate moments, but at this point, oftentimes you have to make it very intentional to have those intimate moments. You have to schedule time together because life has all of a sudden become busy. And when you don't talk and determine out who's going where, when, why, and how, and who's picking up who, again, I think my one of my daughters has probably the most chaotic schedule I could ever imagine. And, she does a great job of keeping it all together because, there are all these different, I call moving parts that make the whole operate. And sometimes that's what life is all about, is just figuring out how to put all those pieces of the puzzle together to make it successful. So the third phase is the momentum phase. That's when the kids are in school. You're still busy. The kids are maybe involved in activities. And so that newfound movement or puzzle that we've pieced all together begins to adjust a little bit. So the kids get older. Maybe they're having play dates. There's all sorts of different things that are happening. Maybe they're getting involved in activities, sports, music, all sorts of different aspects that now we as parents oftentimes want to support them in. And so the hecticness of the new family is going to the next level. Boy, we're picking up steam, we're rolling. It's the momentum phase. It's when all of the different pieces and components are kind of moving together independently, and even a little bit more of a chaotic pace. It begins to quicken. The entire unit is adjusting and shifting and moving and supporting and helping. And all while, if you're choosing to climb that corporate ladder or really looking to build a career, it's when you're in that most prominent place where you're starting to get recognized. You're beginning to move through the steps to get to, the next phase, maybe the big money earning position within the company if you're with, or in your career. I know careers have shifted a lot over the years, but so that's kind of that really, really big piece of it where, the momentum's building, everything's moving and jiving, and depending upon what's happening in the family, it can change drastically. And then, of course, I call the next segment is the peak. The kids are finishing high school, maybe moving on to college or moving out of the home. They're starting to build their own life. And at this time as mothers, we're trying to figure out, how do we shift and adjust what was really a very busy time in life, especially if you have more than one child. And even if you have one child, boy, it is a busy time in life. And all of a sudden, the pace begins to slow a little bit. And then who do we have left? Well, it's us and our significant other. And, depending upon how all those years while the kids were in those two phases of really growing, developing, sometimes that can cause friction in that very intimate relationship. If one parent was the predominant keeper of it all together and the other one's just kind of been a person on the sidelines for the most part, now there's this time to reconnect. At this particular time, I know in my marriage is when as you start to see, you kind of have these groups of like-aged people going through the same things. And so sometimes if you're observant enough to watch others around you, the one thing I started to see was, these mothers were these extremely sad, weeping parents that felt like they were losing their children. And as I thought about that at that time, I was like, okay, this is like the natural evolution of life and parenting is if we've done really a good job, then we should want our children to go out into that world. And I know it's more easily said than done, but I, at that point, made a decision that I was not going to be that weeping empty nester. I wasn't going to allow myself to sit in that spot. So I go, okay, well, I've been married at that point, 20 something years. Now what are we going to do? So what we decided as a couple is that we were going to re-engage. We were going to reconnect with each other. Several seasons, we actually had tickets to the Tampa Bay Rays. And so we did that. That was one activity that brought us together. We were going to games. We were cheering for the team. We had a blast. It was a great season. We actually got a kayak and did some couples activities with different groups and small groups in church and really connected. We did some biking. We were in this discovery phase again of really figuring each other out and who we were individually without these roles of mother or father, mom and dad, and figuring out who we wanted to be with just us as adults. And so it was a phase of really connectedness, because the other thing I didn't want to have happen is I didn't want my marriage to completely fall apart because we abandoned each other through that process of raising a family. And I've watched that happen. Even, 30 plus years, all of a sudden the relationship disintegrates. And I didn't want that. I still feel that that raising a family period is it's a tough time. Boy, there are a lot of different things going on. And my thought was, if we made it through that, now's when we get to truly enjoy life and enjoy each other in a much different pace. Because what we move into in this final fifth phase is what I call the deceleration phase. And so we've reconnected with our partner. That pace begins to slow. I know for me, I enjoy more quiet than I do noise and loudness and activity. It's just kind of where I am. There's not much day-to-day planning. You know, we kind of know what each other's got going on. We know how to ebb and flow at a little bit slower pace. And I'm not planning meals. I'm not planning this. I'm not going here. I'm not keeping it all in order like you have to do sometimes when you have all of those different moving pieces of the family unit that are trying to make sure they all get things taken care of. So the challenging time, though, at relationships is that, you know, we go through that cycle. In hindsight's 2020. I couldn't have had someone, 20 years ago explain to me this is the way it's going to be. I just had to we all had to experience it on our own. But I refused to be that weeping parent, that weeping lost. And I did. I go through, my husband says, I went through a transition, which we all have to, but I wasn't down in the dumps, depressed. I wasn't, not sure what to do with my day. It was a matter of, okay, so now what do I want to do? I started running at that time in my life. And I did quite a bit of running for a long, long time, which is now a little bit slowed. I'm in that deceleration phase. So it's like, okay, do I want to exercise quite that way? I've got a neighbor that's a little bit older than me, and she still is actively biking. And I love that because that's a commitment to herself, doing something that she loves. So I'm in the process of just figuring out what the next phase of what I love to do from that standpoint is. So didn't want to lose my marriage. Didn't want to lose my sanity, did not want to lose myself in the mix. And so I made a kind of a commitment at that point that things were going to be different. This is my time. I'd been a parent from a very, very young age as an adult. And so it was time to kind of just build my own strength, to get my own self back, get me back. So I was this mother. I was this. Now who am I? And oftentimes as women, we can lose ourselves in all of those different roles. The strength, we need to be there for our children. Depending upon your dynamic and relationship, you may need to be the strong person there for your spouse or husband in order to help keep that all together. But it's a huge task. And so my question is, who's going to be there for you? And that's what this is all about, is us connecting together. So first we need to know the pitfalls that can really deteriorate a relationship and create additional stress through those 5 cycles of marriage, of life, of adulthood, because they'll come. These things I can almost guarantee, if I were a betting person, that they are going to come. So the first one is lack of communication. You sometimes in those phases get so super busy that you forget to communicate. And I know for me, there are times when I'll think that I spoke it out loud and communicated it. And guess what? I didn't. I did a really bad job of not recognizing that I really needed to verbalize that. So, maybe find a diligent way to stay in communication and connection, whether it's at the end of the evening every night, or, we have dinner time where we sit down at dinner time, we talk about things. And recently we've started to do that even in the morning. But when couples don't communicate effectively, very quickly, very easily, it can lead to misunderstandings. It can lead to resentment, which ultimately lead to conflict. And I know in one of the suggested recommendations that I'll make this by this one author, he talks about these as the 5 horsemen. And I don't like to think of them that way because I think sometimes there can be this very slow process. I call it the slow fade. And it just seems to happen over time. Work gets busier, you get called out more, maybe you start traveling with your job. Things begin to break down that communication barrier, and all of these, they kind of just creep into the relationship without knowing it. Because number 2 is all about financial problems. Well, money is the major source of stress for couples, I think, and children. But financial problems then put that strain on the marriage. And if the couple's not on the same page financially, it can lead to arguments and conflict. And I know the one thing that I've noticed in younger couples, we're kind of old school, I'll say, but from a financial aspect is that, my money's his money's my money. We pulled it together the day we said I do, and we have never looked back. And so I think what families and relationships tend to do sometimes now is that she has her side of the money, or she handles certain expenses, and then he has the same thing on his side. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a blend, but not always. And sometimes it's a very separate thing. So how do you cross that bridge to make sure that you constantly communicate about all financial aspects to alleviate that stress? When there's ebb and flow, when maybe one's working less because they're now stay at home and all of that. So third is that we have unrealistic expectations. And I try as hard as I can is to let all expectations go, because my philosophy is that if I have expectations, then chances are I'm going to be disappointed, because no one's going to perform the way I expect them to or do what I expect them to. And that just sets myself up for failure. So I try as hard as I can, first of all, openly communicate. If I don't have the opportunity or I don't do it well enough, then I have expectations that maybe become disappointment. And, the hardest thing is that we have those expectations in our marriage. We have maybe, early on, before we even got to the newlywed phase, we had this image and picture of what this marriage was going to be like, what this relationship was going to be. And all of a sudden now that we're in the same household and we're trying to unite our beliefs, our philosophies, our communication styles, our ideas, our dreams, our values, that can create some of that friction, especially if we don't really communicate those expectations up front. They may think that the marriage will be perfect all the time. Absolutely. I could guarantee you it won't. The person that will disappoint you the most is your spouse, your significant other. It's just the nature of the beast. When you have two people so closely tied together, who else are you going to disappoint? Obviously, your significant other and your spouse from time to time. It's all okay, but if there's not an intentional desire to harm you, it was just something that happened, probably because of one of those other things we talked about so far, then you know what? It's time to reunify. And I love that makeup phase. But anyway, I can digress quickly. 4, we're going to talk about is lack of intimacy. And I have watched this change over the years. I know when I had my first daughter, my mom was great to help me remember and realize that I really wanted to establish her in her own space at night. So it was difficult at times when I was going through that separation and becoming a single parent and really getting her to sleep in her own bed, in her own room, give myself that time to rest in my own space. But ultimately, what that was setting me up for is an opportunity, once I found the next intimate relationship, which was going to be a marriage. It allowed us to have our own private space. And today, I am just so grateful for that, because we always had an opportunity to have a place to be intimate, to have those talks. We would say, we're going to talk. But that's how it works. We just need to make sure that we have that connection and stay intimate with one another. And intimate's not always physical, because it can be emotional as well, and staying tied to our best friend. So the way things begin to separate is when we allow that intimacy, or we begin to confide in someone else intimately about those most deepest thoughts and feelings, and not relying on our spouse. That's when things begin to deteriorate. So just realize that we all, especially this relationship, if it's going to be successful long term, is we've got to keep that intimate connection together in order to make it successful. And sometimes it's harder than others. Sometimes we've got to really be much more intentional about it to make it all work. And then, of course, one of the things that we're all probably very familiar with is the concept and idea of infidelity. But think about it this way. Infidelity in any form or fashion, whatever came to mind when I said that word, is nothing more than a betrayal of trust. And the difficulty is once that trust is broken, even in our partner, it can be extremely difficult to reestablish that in the relationship. Sometimes it is beyond repair. But ultimately, if you both have that commitment to move beyond that, guess what? It can be successful moving forward. So there are a whole bunch of different outliers, though, such as substance abuse, domestic violence, growing apart, not including the same values and goals when you originally met, and having those open discussions, as well as potential mental health problems. Now, those can all be added challenges that we may experience in that relationship. But ultimately, we've got to deal with life. We've got to deal with the stress that comes. And those are kind of what I call the top 5 of challenges or difficulties that we may experience. And as I said, I don't believe that it's if, it's going to be a matter of when, because somewhere along the way, all of those things kind of happen. They happen naturally in relationships who kind of just pull apart. Women go through, our change in cycles and our change in hormones, and all of a sudden we start feeling all these things that, oh my gosh, I never knew before. And, our partner, unfortunately, as much as they try to understand, possibly, they just don't. They don't understand what a hot flash means. They don't understand what that whole feeling is when you're going through the menstrual cycle. So, although there's not an mutual understanding, there's a way just to communicate that and keep that open in relationships in order to help avoid those pitfalls. So, of course, we got to talk about solutions. We can't end with all the problems. We've got to find a way to bring it back together, make it all work. And from communication standpoint, we got to talk openly, talk honestly. And maybe that's an agreed upon commitment that you have together when you're in that newlywed phase. I want us to make sure that we sit down and talk openly, that we share our feelings and thoughts. And maybe it's the time to share kind of who you are and what you've become. Maybe you're not a feeling person, so this would be something new. We also have to have a commitment to be a good listener and really, really listen to what our partner's saying and try to understand it from their perspective. I don't have to be where they are, but I have to respect and understand, because that's the next step in the communication process, is being respectful. It's okay to disagree. And sometimes we'll say, I don't see it that way. And it's okay that we disagree on that. But learn to communicate effectively, both in the good times and the bad times. And, there are times when maybe it's, we one of our commitments early on in our marriage was that we aren't going to go to bed angry. So we're going to flesh it out. We're going to work it out so that we're not actually laying our head down at night angry. We never, I hear lots of couples say, oh, he was kicked to the doghouse. And they literally mean kicked out of the bedroom or kicked out of certain aspects of the home. And they're sleeping in a different place. And we just, never made that commitment. Another one might be, you don't use the D word. You don't talk about the word divorce. Maybe that just doesn't have a place in conversation. So it's not something at the heat of moment when you're in an angry spot to throw that out as a threat or tactic. So those are all the things that you can usually talk about early on. So financial problems, how to kind of overcome those, is be on the same page with your partner. Your financial goals. Over the years, my husband and I have each had our opportunity to be the money manager of our household, and that gave us both a different aspect, although now I've kept it for a lot longer. But create a budget together and then stick to it. Have that mutual commitment to achieve the financial goals that you want to achieve together, and communicate openly about spending habits. Again, those are things that you kind of bring from our family of origins, and we maybe need to now discover and uncover how, as a couple, you want to move forward with that. And seek professional help if you're struggling with managing any of those finances. So don't hesitate to reach out to someone else. Some of the times in my adult life, that's been the most difficult. Well, who do I really have an opportunity to reach out to? It's been tough because, I don't have some of those close, long, strong relationships. And I feel that I might be judged if I actually have a chance to openly talk about my situation with a family member. So therefore, in order to keep myself safe emotionally, I'm not willing to do that. But find someone, reach out to an EAP. And with the unrealistic expectations, we got to make sure that we talk to our partners about those expectations. The best way to communicate that is before it happens. Once we're in the middle of disappointment or frustration because things didn't quite go the way we wanted, that's not the time to really, okay, well, this is what happened, because what will happen at that point is you'll bring up this whole history, and then all of a sudden that's an unproductive conversation. But be realistic about what marriage is and marriage isn't. Pick up a book, listen to an audiobook. Audible, I absolutely love Audible these days. I still read paper, and I probably have 3 or 4 different books laying around that I read sporadically, but I'm also listening to audiobooks as well. And be willing to compromise in order to meet your partner halfway. So we are in this relationship together. We're maneuvering this thing called life together. And, it's not always going to go my way. It's not always going to go his way. We sometimes have to compromise in order to achieve success together. And then when it comes to lack of intimacy, start to make time for each other. Sometimes we, as the woman, have to recognize what's happening and step up our leadership role in that relationship in order to take that intimate piece back. Intimacy to a woman is significantly different than an intimacy to a man. And understanding that, is important. Plan date nights. I've watched this happen in, my family members, that all of a sudden what used to be important to go on date nights doesn't happen quite the same. But there's also a shift in the social norm, and people are taking their kids to places that I would never have taken my children when I was raising them. So again, life is just becoming very different. So plan those regular date nights. There's one friend in particular, they have, and I'm going to get the count wrong, but I don't know, they have anywhere between 13 and 16 children. They have just a massive family. And the one thing that I have always cherished about her is that she is very committed to having date nights with her spouse. They do it every week. They have for all of these years. They've got, their oldest are in their 20s. And so they've made that commitment to have a date night every single week in order to stay connected. And the mother has dates with the children and the father has dates with the children. And so they've just made a very committed relationship with each one of them. But then find those activities that you enjoy doing together, and what you enjoyed when you dated may not be the same things after you start a family that you enjoy doing. So be physically affectionate with each other. Still hold hands when you're out in public. Now, we're not really affectionate in that way. But I know that that's what works for him. That's his love language. And we may talk about love languages in one of these series as well. But talk to your partner about their sexual needs, their desires, and have a willingness to really have that open communication in order to benefit your relationship. And then, of course, if there is a cheating partner, come clean as soon as possible on either side of it. We maybe don't really know what was going on. Maybe it was that slow fade that happened and you don't have an idea of what they were going through at the moment. There's a completely different situation with someone that has infidelity and is refusing to acknowledge it because they really don't maybe want the relationship to continue. So that really will paint the picture. Ask for what you want, look at what you get. Just kind of going back to that same simple motto. But be honest with your partner. Ask them to be honest with you. What was it about? What was it that broke that trust in our relationship? And then how are we going to rebuild it? And obviously you may need to seek some professional help after that situation. But these can be tough things to do. If you value your relationship, there may be a time when, there's one or many of these risks of losing the relationship that we value most will kind of be present. And so what are we going to do to really be committed to ourselves, possibly committed to that commitment that you made that other person initially when you took those vows of marriage or commitments to one another? So it's time to really reflect on what may be happening. And be mindful of the fact that you don't go from perfect marriage, perfect relationship today, and then tomorrow it's horrible. It's usually this very slow progressive fade where, all of a sudden we're not spending as much time together, or I find myself completely exhausted at the end of the night. So I'm falling asleep before he even has a moment to come join me and talk. So those are the slow fade things that begin to deteriorate and eat away on that relationship little by little by little, that then cause bigger things to happen. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I have totally enjoyed spending some time talking about marriage and the pitfalls and ways that we can overcome them, but also recognizing that we go through this cycle or this life cycle in marriage and life in general, and, kind of maneuvering through that, enjoying it for what it is. On our next episode, we're going to talk all about our family of origin, the family you were raised in, and all aspects that impact us as women that are growing up, and then we carry that into our adult lives. So we're going to really dive deep into that. But let me know in the comments how you plan to build a strong foundation for your marriage that lasts a lifetime, whether you're in a marriage now or you're looking to potentially be in a marriage in the future. So what things are you going to do to be the amazing woman, the amazing wife, the amazing partner that you're looking for in someone else? Because it does ultimately start with us. So go ahead, let me know what's going on in your mind. Oh, and by the way, if you plan on purchasing anything from Amazon, I will provide a link for you in the description. That small purchase that you maybe make, a percentage of that does come back to me. And I appreciate that, because what that does is it helps continue to produce the podcast for you. So be sure to stay tuned into next week's show. You do not want to miss an episode. And I thank you so much for being part. And look at the links below. Several books that I've been reading or have read said are there that you may want to pick up. If you're struggling with one aspect of your relationship, be sure to share, like, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. We have so much more to talk about, and I cannot wait to hear from you. So until next time, see you soon.